You know, it has occurred to me, after all of these lessons, I have yet to have one on something that is very important to our natures as kindred, that of the simple ghoul. And while I have discussed them various times before, I have yet to do a full and whole conversation about them in detail. But since this is so overdue, I shall give you a bit of homework, shall I say, to go along with our discussion. See, I've seen you come quite far now, and I do believe it is time for you to get yourself a ghoul of your own, if you don't already have one. And you will know exactly what to look for after our discussion tonight. But first, let me go over the basics, just in case you have forgotten some details. So to put it simply, a ghoul is a mortal who has tasted the blood of a vampire. As soon as the vitae of a kindred enters the system of a mortal being, they will feel it. A kick in their very system, the ultimate high you can imagine, like giving ambrosia to that of a young babe. But just like anything that's addictive, they would want it more and more. And it only takes a very small amount of vitae, say the equivalent of one gulp of blood, to begin the process of turning into a ghoul. When this is done, it almost always begins the blood bond, the mental domination of the person drinking the blood, the utter and total control of their mind until they become a willing and enthusiastic slave. The control of their brain is so total and absolute that they will have no concept of betraying the orders given to them, since a small part of their master is within them now, puppeting their very thoughts, making sure not a single aspect is unscathed of this change. When this bond is made, the kindred that controls them and becomes their master is known as the domitor, and the ghoul is a thrall. I should also note that these terms change when a kindred is blood bonded by another. The domitor is then known as the regnant, but the one who drinks the blood is still a thrall. However, one would be wise to avoid calling a kindred by such a term, since many would consider it the most gravest of insults, especially if they were forced into it, although many might not care due to their total and utter loyalty. And most ghouls will have no concept or interaction with other kindred outside of their domitor. And the control a kindred has over a ghoul is far greater than one over another kindred. For an inaccurate representation and visualization, imagine the concept of the domitor's blood entering the very brain, manipulating it, molding it, reshaping it to alter its very wants. But when a kindred is a thrall, it is merely a cage around the brain. If the bond ends, the ghoul might break down, or have their brain completely rewire again to change their very person. But the kindred's mind will simply break free of the cage and go back to its old self. But as soon as a mortal drinks the blood, they will begin to turn into a ghoul. And being a ghoul gives them some very useful powers. Quite a lot of the benefits of their master, with none of the major weaknesses. They will become stronger, tougher, faster, probably smarter, and even heal much faster, about 4 times faster than a normal person. But they won't be able to, say, regrow limbs slowly like us kindred do, only what a normal person is capable of, just far better. They even get limited access to your discipline. Typically the one the kindred they first drank from is most skilled in, although this can change if they start to drink from another over a long period of time. And, believe it or not, a ghoul themselves has a bit of sway in this endeavor. If they want to keep their old one and the new domitor they have doesn't have it, they might be able to keep hold of it if they use it constantly and focus on it mentally. Although, because they only have a small amount of our precious vitae flowing in their normal human blood, instead of the whole thing being replaced, it's quite risky for them to use any discipline beyond its most basic form. You see, when we kindred start using complex powers, it quickly drains the blood of our system. It's being used up, so to speak, absorbed by the magic, or however you want to phrase it, and that's why we get more hungry. But human beings are not supposed to just lose vast quantities of blood very quickly. What this results in is the using of more complex powers heavily damaging the ghoul. As an example, if they could use Dominate, they would easily be able to give a single one-word command like drop or run. But if they wanted to give a more complex command, say, wait until a gunshot is fired and then run, it would hurt them, as the vitae in their system would draw on their regular blood, in so doing, damaging the body. How many disciplines they have access to, however, depends entirely on the power of their current domitor. The older and more potent of their blood, allowing them to have access to more powers. I should also note that the swapping of Ghoul from master to master, changing who they are bound to, is quite rare, and only really done for a few specific reasons. Sometimes a very skilled Ghoul will be given as a gift for one kindred to another, or a Ghoul will be taken away as a punishment for that kindred. A very common practice between Ventrue and Tzimisce, and if either of them offer you a Ghoul, you should view it as a great honor, for very different reasons. But the other major reason is linked to their greatest tragedy. See, as soon as a mortal becomes a Ghoul, they will stop aging entirely, and look just as they did the moment they first drank the vitae. However, if the Ghoul does not drink for over a month, they will start to revert back into becoming immortal, and they will age all of the time they have missed. It's not a problem if they've only been so for a year or two, but if they've already been one for say 200 years, well, you can see the problem. So when a Ghoul's domitor meets their final death, the Ghoul has a problem, as they will need to find a new source of vitae soon, or risk fading away and dying. However, I should note, despite it being exceptionally rare, that it is possible to still be a Ghoul without being bound. The blood bond is not a requirement, but merely an obvious step all should take, and you'd be a fool not to. So a Ghoul could negotiate a deal for some vitae in exchange for a service, instead of just servitude. Although I should only really note that those who are exceptionally old and or skilled in some manner are able to pull this off. They also have to be quite clever to outsmart a kindred. And in these modern nights there are plenty of kindred with mortal sensibilities around this sort of thing. So perhaps they are even fond of the idea of more independent Ghouls, which to anyone's ears and eyes who are not clouded with the fog of youth and inexperience could easily be seen as the horrible idea that it is, and will obviously end in disaster. Allowing a skilled and competent Ghoul to run around is one thing. After all, they're probably smart enough not to break the Masquerade, and so their existence can be permitted, so long as they don't do anything drastic or stupid. But as someone who is intentionally creating Ghouls, but not fully bonding them, well, that's a different story altogether, and is far more likely that the kindred is the one to get into trouble, not the Ghouls. That should also go to show you just how the Camarilla view the Ghouls. Extensions of their kindred masters, not free independent beings themselves, but tools and puppets. And I can completely understand the logic behind it when you're literally inside of their mind, reshaping their thoughts. At this point, they are little more than an extension. But that's enough on how they actually work for now. Let us get into what's a good way to create a Ghoul, and how to get the most out of your Ghoul, or Ghouls, depending on your ambition. For a start, there are many different types of Ghouls, all with different roles and speciality. This goes a bit beyond human professionalism, but not as complex as our clan structure. It's sort of an in-between, so to speak. To briefly go over how I class them, there are your classical servant Ghouls. These are your typical specialists trained to do one thing exceptionally well for their master. Whether it's using a computer for them, your classic butler or maid staff, being their eyes and ears during the daylight, or a highly trained assassin. This is what most Ghouls are, and in many cases will often be picked from an already highly skilled mortal individual and trained to be supernaturally superb. All Ghouls who the Domitor will actually care about and respect are going to be one of these, but so are the most disposable, the ones that are just used for their blood and treated like dogs. Some servant Ghouls will one day be embraced by their Domitor. They view this as a testing ground to see if they are ready to be embraced, while some will be killed once they outlive their usefulness. Because of this, I can't really go into much more detail on them, since these Ghouls are very much a case-by-case subject, so for now I will just move on. Next is the War Ghouls, something often employed by the likes of the Tzimisce, who even have their own variants. But what separates these from regular ghouls is the speed they are often made and their almost complete disposability. See, we in the Camarilla would never make a shovelhead. No, that's barbaric. But ghouling an entire mercenary task force, giving them limited information about what they actually are, and a selective mind wipe once the job is done, only to not make them ghouls again once their month is up, well, that's a different thing altogether now, isn't it? Most war ghouls are quite ignorant of what they are, and in many cases not trained in any supernatural arts, merely hoping that their new supernatural strengths and natural talent combined can carry them through anything. And to be entirely fair, it almost always can. But this does result in the slightly paradoxical scenario that some servant ghouls are actually much better in combat than the ones with war in the name. But it does not really matter much, since if one of them can take out 5, well, you have 10 of them, so why should you care? I also want to mention the Tzimisce variants. See, with their mastery of fleshcrafting, they will of course turn their war ghouls into monstrosities, grotesque and foul, but also powerful. The Slactor, as they call them, is a single ghoul who has been modified, having its limbs replaced to be more specialized or just sticking a hammer instead of his hand, but sometimes more are added if needed. Although most of them are used for war, some can serve as servants instead. It's quite uncommon though. And they have the Vaults, creatures made from melding multiple ghouls together into one being, or adding so much flesh onto one particular ghoul that it's essentially multiple beings, often driven mad and feral in the process. But with the use of Dominate, it can be kept in line for a while at least. But it does not really matter what the creature is feeling, since its only role and purpose is to cause as much chaos and panic as soon as it is released. It should go without saying that its very existence is a breach of the Masquerade, and any kindred with half a brain will destroy it on sight. I should also note that animals can become these types of ghouls as well, with the likes of Nosferatu and Gangrels using many animal servants, and almost every other clan can use war ghouls, often calling them things like hellhounds and other nicknames in order to distinguish them. It's also quite common for those kindred to get very attached to their animal companions, anyone skilled with animalism to have what we would call a familiar, an animal they are so deeply connected to that they're almost one and the same being. But another type of ghoul worth noting is the Unwitting ghoul, or one who is a ghoul but does not know they are one. This is quite a common tactic for the Ventrue, Tremere, and La Sombra, keeping those around you, giving them power, having control over them, but clouding their mind after to make them forget what has happened, or altering their memory so much in their mind that they can't really make heads or tail of it, and so just cast the thoughts away. Quite a lot of spies we kindred sent out to other groups tend to be this sort of ghoul. It's very easy for your hidden operative to remain a secret if they themselves don't even know they're a sleeper agent, only for the whispers of their Domitor to activate them in a moment's notice. I should also note that one must be at least somewhat skilled in the discipline of Dominate in order to pull this off to a reasonable degree. Lying, manipulating, and gaslighting, so to speak, can only get you so far. On to the next, we have the Independent Ghoul, who I've already briefly gone over. These are individuals who have the benefits of being a ghoul, but are not directly under the control of a Domitor, as in they are not blood-bonded. I should note that many of them are actually still loyal to the Camarilla, or at least kindred as general, and are willing to do whatever they are commanded to do, and are choosing to follow those orders. As ghouls often change hands again and again, some are often lost in the process, typically when one who is about to exchange a ghoul meets their final death. And if that ghoul is clever enough to find a source of vitae without being bound, they may be permitted, or they might just be ignored, or they might be hunted down and killed. It's very circumstantial. For an example, I know of one ghoul who tried to write of kindred exploits to a local newspaper. They thought they had cleverly left out all of the most obvious parts that would given away who they were. Our ghouls within the organization immediately informed us. That ghoul is not a problem. But for a counterexample, one Toreador ghoul who was a butler and also a bodyguard, he tried his hardest to save his master's life, but in the end, she perished, assassinated by an entire Sabbat pack. He, however, viewed this as his own failure. Well, I mean, he did fail, but given it was one ghoul versus an entire Sabbat pack, and he held his ground, well, I'm actually quite impressed, as was the Primogen who the ghoul returned to offer his own life for his failure to save his master. But the Primogen took quite a liking to this ghoul and thought it would be a waste of talent to kill them, so decided to keep them, but not to bound them, since they believed their over-attached loyalty actually led to their misjudgment. I disagreed in that case specifically, but I do see the logic in it, and since then they have shown that they are indeed quite competent. When a ghoul is loyal, however, it should be noted that there's no real distinction between them and one that is a bound servant. If anything, they're almost more trustworthy since they've made the decision to be loyal. I ask you this, who is more loyal? One who cannot have the option to betray, or one who does, but has never taken it? But many kindred will fret about the independent ghoul being a horrible threat. They are, but not really a big threat, no, not at all. There are many different ones you should keep your eye on, like the one I wish to discuss now, who is quite the opposite. The hunter ghoul is something we need to hunt and kill on sight, lest they do the same to us. This is not a one servant who has turned on their master and plans to kill all of our kind. They're quite easy to deal with because we know of them. No. This is a hunter who has found out what a ghoul is and has willingly and knowledgefully turned themselves into one. The hunters of the Second Inquisition are already a problem as it is. As soon as they become organized in any fashion and start become a real threat, we call for meetings at Elysium's. But when they start to figure out our secrets, identifying which one of us are in what positions, and start to ghoul themselves, well, that's when kindred like me are called in. And hunter ghouls are something I have to deal with quite a bit. They are common enough to where it's probably half of the things a city will call for one of my rank and station to help with, but big enough of a problem for where most of us will say yes, most of the time. If we are lucky, it is just one rogue hunter, who has, through experimentation, a bit of luck, and I would say a very large pair of balls, found a way to ghoul themselves. In my experiments, most who do this keep themselves as ghouls temporarily, typically treating it like a drug or supplement to help them during their hunt. Although I know of one or two who have found ways to keep themselves as one forever, often imprisoning younger kindred to take their blood. When it is an organized operation with a ghoul task force, however, this is when our worst nightmares are met. And in these modern nights, this is the leading death of the most powerful of our number, after the beckoning, that is. This is the main reason I founded a task force of my own. To fight fire with fire was the mindset behind it, and it's worked out well so far. The few times I've had to temporarily order a complete abandonment of a city, it is often because a force like this, or one capable of this at least, has arrived on the scene. But, moving on, there is still one other type of ghoul who we will have to have an in-depth discussion for another night. But to briefly go over them now, they are genetic ghouls. Ghouls who have started to generate their own vitae within their system, while most of their blood is still that of a normal human. They are known as Revenants. How this happens, it's actually quite simple. When a mummy ghoul and a daddy ghoul love each other very much, the child they create might be born as a Revenant. This actually happening is rare, exceptionally rare, but it does happen, and all of their children from then on out will be one as well. Because of this, there are many Revenant families, some famous, others monstrous, and some are just weird. But again, there is quite a lot to know about them, and I will have to save their discussion probably for our next one, actually. You know, I'm actually quite upset with myself for not getting into this discussion until now, for I pride myself on not being the type to underestimate people. Really, I think it's quite good to, well, be on guard around many others would overlook. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you have even started to do such a thing. After all, you are becoming quite powerful now. But you should never underestimate ghouls. Those who are fed on the sliver of pure power, fanatically loyal or not, will do almost anything to get the rest. You can see how they will go above and beyond, while many of us will overlook them. Just as you have failed to notice that my ghoul has been in the room this whole conversation, haven't you? Thank you, Arthur. That'll be all. You may leave. Oh, do not worry, my wolf. I do not view this as a failure on your part, just a success on his. Impressive, right? How a ghoul can have such command of obfuscate despite it not being the main one I gave him. Arthur, I mean. A ghoul who has served me since the Great War, or World War I as it's known now. To this night he has killed 27 men, 4 kindred, 7 ghouls, and even 2 mages on my command. He has served as my bodyguard for many years, and I can count the amount of times his operations have had a complication on one hand. And he has only ever failed a single mission I sent him. One failure per 100 years of unending service is quite the track record in my eyes. If anything, I would be suspicious if he had never failed. This, to me, in a strange contradictory truth sort of way, makes him more trustworthy. I've had many ghouls that serve me as well, of course. A butler, several powerful figures including CEOs, and my task force, and those are just the ones that are around today. But Arthur is by far my most competent, and if he continues in this endeavor, and this remains between you and me, but I do plan to embrace him one night. I am one of the few kindred who ghoul those they plan to embrace first, and since I fear the ever-diluting of our blood, I thought this would be good for our, I want to say, ecosystem. I know I'm not the only one of this age who's had such a thought, and if things keep going worse for me, as I fear they might do, I might have to do this sooner rather than later. It has been a while since I've embraced another, and since many of my own childhood no longer wish to speak to me, I thought this would be good for me as well. But ghouls are always something to note. You really shouldn't go out without them. And I remind you of the task I set you at the very beginning. You should go out and make one if you have yet to do so already. After all, many of kindred are defined by their connection and power to those beneath them. Or truly, we couldn't function without them. Not as powerful as we do, anyway. Thank you for listening to my tales. I'm the Ashspawn. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. But, till next we meet, fellow travelers. Have a good night.